Bienvenidos a Gracias por tu Servicio, el podcast con la intención de hablar sobre los temas relevantes de los militares, veteranos y veteranas de Puerto Rico. En el episodio de hoy estaremos hablando con Armando Hernández de Home Base. Bienvenido a un nuevo episodio de Gracias por tu Servicio. En el episodio de hoy estaremos hablando con Armando Hernández sobre Home Base. Pero antes de comenzar, quiero presentar a la compañera Nilmari Colón. Saludos, Colón.
Saludos, Ortiz. Hola a todos, ¿verdad? Que no me escuchan en la noche de hoy. No sé si están escuchando bien, pero aquí está viendo. Los coquillos están encendidos, como siempre. O sea, si no escuchas coquín corozal, no es corozal.
Muy bien. No, yo los escuché también durante la entrevista que vamos a estar dando. Así que sí, sé que están activados los coquis por ahí. Queremos recordarles que seguimos con nuestro giveaway oficial. Para celebrar nuestros 2 años como proyecto, queremos mostrar nuestra apreciación por el apoyo que nos han dado desde los comienzos, con 3 gift bags que incluyen una camisa perfecta de nuestros amigos de Torre del Viejo, una gorra de GBTS, un sticker pack con nuestros logos y un parcho de Irreverent Warriors. Para participar, todo lo que tienes que hacer es comentar en nuestra página de Facebook debajo de este episodio cuando sea publicado el 20 de octubre con tus comentarios u opiniones sobre el tema que se discutió o nuestro desempeño a través de las últimas 2 temporadas. Asegúrate de también darle like, share a este episodio en tu página personal. Nos encantaría saber lo que piensan de nuestro proyecto hasta el momento. Así que siéntanse libres de participar en los comentarios y compartir sus ideas. También responderemos a sus comentarios, así que vamos a crear una conversación saludable. El concurso finaliza el 11 de noviembre, así que estén pendientes, ya que anunciaremos el ganador un poco después. Nuevamente, gracias por ser una parte increíble de nuestra comunidad. Today's guest is Armando Hernández, Senior Director of Home Base. Home Base is a remarkable national nonprofit dedicated to healing the invisible wounds for veterans, service members, as well as other benefits for their family members. Several months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Armando, and from the very start, it was evident how passionate and dedicated he is to Home Base's mission. Since then, we've kept in touch, and thankfully, he was gracious enough to make an appearance here with us. Welcome to our podcast, Armando.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Before we go into the questions, I want to let the audience know that Home Base has already been here a couple of times in Puerto Rico, and successfully, they've made an impact. I've heard from veterans I speak to that they're thankful for you guys coming down. They're seeing your commitment because that was one of the things they had asked for at one time. I want to say a shout out to Angie and Jaime. They're superstars. So if they're listening, hopefully we'll see you guys soon. My first question for you is, how did the partnership between Massachusetts General Hospital and the Boston Red Sox come about to create Home Base?
That's a great question, David. You know, it's really unique to have like a professional sports team and hospital system get together to kind of collaborate on something like this. And it's a really kind of fascinating, unique story. So, you know, back in 2007, when the Red Sox won the World Series, like a lot of teams, you know, the next year they kind of go to Washington, D.C., and they do a tour, they meet with the president, they do that whole thing. Well, at the time, the Red Sox medical director is a gentleman named Dr. Larry Ronan, who had very close ties, had served a lot around trying to help veterans in the military. And so he had some connections at Walter Reed and scheduled a visit for the baseball team to go by Walter Reed and visit some of those wounded sailors, soldiers, and Marines. And what was really supposed to just be a quick visit, 1 hour in and out for the team and the players, it was expanded. It was much longer, 3 and 4 hour visit, because so many of the coaches and the teammates were having such a good time just meeting with these warriors who were in such high spirits, despite the situations that they might be in with some of their injuries. And I think the team was really moved. And the team was also under fairly new ownership at the time, under Chairman Tom Warner. And when Tom left that day, we credit him with the vision because he said, you know, I want to help this group. I want to see what we can do to help veterans and service members when they're returning from home. And so Mr. Warner approached the DOD, right, the Department of Defense, and said, how can we help? And they said, well, you know what? Again, this is in 2008 at the height of the wars there in Iraq and Afghanistan. The DOD said, the physical wounds, the amputations, the burns, we've been working on that stuff for a long time, right? And we're getting pretty good at it. But the thing that kind of scares us now is these invisible wounds, right? The post-traumatic stress that we're seeing our veterans and some of their family members really deal with. And so that was a great challenge, right? And what does a baseball team know about behavioral health and post-traumatic stress? Tom, in the great wisdom that he had, realized that just down the street was Massachusetts General Hospital, right? Which is often ranked one of the top and largest psychiatric departments in the country, which also draws off the resources of Harvard Medical School as well. And so he approached them and said, hey, why don't we think about getting together and starting a program that's going to really help veterans and their families? And so they did. And in 2009, they opened the doors to home base, and since then have served over 30,000 veterans and family members.
30,000 is a lot, especially from that time, and especially with all the benefits that you guys have for them. So that's an amazing accomplishment in itself.
How has this collaboration influenced the organization mission and the impact on the community?
The collaboration bred more collaboration, right? And I think that, one of the things that Homebase did once they started in New England in 2009 in Boston was they quickly realized that they had a great product and they were helping veterans and all their family members and doing it in a way that was really filling the gaps in the care. But what they also realized is that, they could only help so many veterans as a regional-based program, and that they wanted to focus on trying to expand into a national-based program. And that's kind of hard to do, right? When you have a brand like the Red Sox and Mass General, you can't just kind of pick that up and move that to Florida. You can't move that to anywhere else necessarily and have the same effect, have the same network. And so what they did was we focused on developing what we call a community empowerment model, where we partner with the organizations already in these communities and really train them and focus to help them deliver what we call veteran-centered care. And veteran-centered care is care that's trauma-informed, military culturally competent, right? Making sure that the clinicians know what the veterans are going through and their backgrounds and their experiences. It provides wraparound services, not just for the care that they're delivering, but maybe case management services, maybe substance use services, other things like couples counseling and group therapy, right? Really providing those wraparound needs. And it's providing it at absolutely no cost and in a timely manner. And so through our collaboration with the Red Sox and Mass General, we knew that we were going to have to draw on the resources and the strengths of each of these organizations. And that led us into a mindset of collaboration and working with other organizations. And so, now we've unrolled this model out in Florida. We're also rolling it out in Arizona. There's some other places that are potentially on the horizon. And so I would say that, the initial collaboration really started to help us start with a mindset of collaboration and knowing that really no one entity is going to solve these problems. It's far too grand for any one entity. And so it's really about organizations coming together. We often say at Homebase, veterans don't come home to programs like Homebase or like the VA. They come home to communities. And it's really the communities that have to band together and figure out how we solve these issues. So I think collaboration breeds more collaboration.
Speaking about the cultural competence, one of the things that occurs when a service member or a veteran goes to a community hospital or one of these specialized treatment facilities, they go there and they don't feel as they're actually valued for what they've done, and they'll treat those symptoms as something generalized, forgetting that they've actually been through certain experiences that make them unique, which is something I think with programs such as Homebase gives them that advantage to help out and to actually reach treatment goals that probably won't be met in any other place that do not focus on the cultural competencies of the military population.
Yeah, we know that building trust in the veteran community is not easy to do. It's not something that you can just say, hey, we're here and we're here to help, right? And so if veterans feel like you don't understand them, you don't understand their unique challenges, some of the situations they've been through, right? If you're not familiar with what a deployment even is or what it looks like or the stresses it has on a family, right? Can you really relate to the pain that I'm going through and that I'm, about to share with you? So for us, it's really important to make sure that our partners and our clinicians that are treating veterans are culturally competent. And they're not going to go in there and call a Marine a soldier or, try to empathize with something that they've been through if they've never really been through something similar. And so for us, that's a really important piece.
Yeah, I was paying attention when you specifically said sailor, soldier, and Marine and airman, because we do have to make that distinction between the branches, because Marines don't like being called soldiers because they're Marines. So something like that could turn off that initial counseling session, calling a Marine a soldier or something other than what they are. You can lose them right there.
Yeah, it's a really quick way to let them know that you don't really understand their culture, right? And sure, Marines don't like to be called anything other than Marines, but similarly, if I was a sailor and somebody was saying, hey, you just got to be tough there, soldier, right? It just gives me this feeling that right away, you don't understand the differences between the branches. And, that's pretty superficial. That's pretty high level. If you don't even understand the difference between the branches, do you really understand the unique challenges that me and my family are facing?
Yeah.
I would like to add also to include the gender and the age and the different generations. For example, if something happened to me that people, when I go to any maybe veteran facility or military facility, if I'm not wearing the uniform, sometimes I get confused as a family member, as a spouse. I know that the woman in the military has been growing up a lot, so that will help us to get the message to other people and let them know the females also serve. It's not only that we are family members, which is good too, to be a family member because we need that support, right? But we need to understand that the females, we also serve. So just because we are female doesn't mean that we are family members when we are reaching out for any type of agency or services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think females make up roughly 15% of our military. And so they increasingly are taking on more combat-related roles and risk. And so, their service is as valuable as any. And so we need to make sure that we're not assuming simply because they're not a man that perhaps they're a spouse or a family member. And we need to remember that there's a real possibility that that female veteran has served and served in such significant ways that the average person might not be able to understand or relate to that. But that's part of the culture. It's a great point. We really have to continue to nail that home as well.
Could you elaborate on the specific services and programs that Homebase offers to support veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. So Homebase really focuses on what we call the 4 pillars of care, right? And so the 4 things we really focus on are clinical care, wellness, education, and training, and then research. And so as far as the research goes, we're part of Mass General, Harvard, like any good academic medical center. It's really important for us to collect data, find out what this data is telling us, disseminate that information to the community to make sure that they can take that and use it as best practice. So research is a big component of what we do, surely. Education and training is also a big part, and again, one of our pillars. And that for us is important because we know in order to really treat the invisible wounds, we need to make sure that all of the community is aware of what's going on, right? And so for us, it's about training clinicians so that they can treat veterans with cultural competency as well as trauma-informed care. It's about training first responders because sometimes first responders will run into a veteran and maybe not their best moment, right? Maybe a police officer sees a veteran and it looks like a drunken disorderly, but really that veteran has a traumatic brain injury. And so for us, it's important to make sure that that officer knows, hey, maybe I can recognize some tattoos here. Maybe I recognize some language they're using. Okay, maybe this isn't just, kind of the average case. Maybe this is something important. So, and then educating and training hospital systems, large corporations, right? If you're a large corporation in Florida, chances are you employ, roughly 10% of your population is veterans, right? And then how many of those are family members? And so for us, it's important for them to understand the unique challenges that some of their employees might be going through, as well as the resources that are available to them. So research and education are a big part of what we do. The 3rd pillar is wellness. And so for us, that's really around this concept of sound body and sound mind, right? You can take care of your mind and you can take care of your body, but what the research is really telling us and what we believe more and more than ever is is they're not really two separate things. Body and mind are one. And so it's important for us to take care of ourselves physically, address the injuries that we face in service, right? A lot of us get out and we have bad knees and bad backs and bad shoulders from our service, and our wellness tends to decline over time, right? We gain weight, we become more sedentary, and that creates increased pain, lower quality of life, all things that really just exacerbate, behavioral health issues that veterans might be facing. So it's really about taking care of yourself, eating right, being resilient, and doing those things through exercise, art, yoga, whatever modality might be best for you. But there really needs to be a strong wellness component to that. And then last, but certainly not least, is our clinical care, right? And that's more of what you would think of as evidence-based behavioral therapy, right? So that's providing, ongoing outpatient services for veterans and their families regionally in certain parts of the United States. One of our biggest clinical programs is also actually known as the Intensive Clinical Program, which is a 2-week partial hospitalization program in Boston where we fly veterans from all over the country and, multiple countries throughout the world in to get probably about 1.5 years worth of therapy compressed into 2 weeks. And it's really a phenomenal program that's had a 95% graduation rate, as well as some really significant signs of decreased depression and anxiety that tend to have long-lasting results as well. And so, that's one of our key programs. And then more recently, as we talk about the invisible wounds and we see the prevalence of this really building up, Home Base has created a special emphasis on trying to treat traumatic brain injury, because we know that this is one thing that is also plaguing the veteran population and can often have overlapping signs and symptoms of PTSD. And that's scary because the treatment models are completely different. You can't treat those two issues the same. You have to treat them individually as needed, but they kind of look the same sometimes. And additionally, we really noticed that traumatic brain injury is very prevalent in the special operators population just based on the work that they do, right? The job hazards that come along with that. And so we're really focusing on some specific traumatic brain injuries for that population as well. So it's a long-winded answer, but like I said, we really focus on the 4 pillars of care: education, research, wellness, and clinical care.
Yeah, you guys cover a lot. To use the baseball term, you're covering all the bases. A couple of months ago, one of the veterans that I know, he was able to participate in the program, and he spoke very highly of what he's done over there. Being in that 2-week program has helped him see things that he probably wasn't able to see, seeing a psychiatrist every 6 months or a psychologist every 6 months or something of that sort. So getting that intensive treatment helped him to break through some of those stuck points he was having, and he's actually doing way much better. So I've already seen the progress, and I've noticed it in the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of progress that can be made in 2 weeks. I think sometimes people think this intensive model is too short to really make a difference, but you really can get an amazing result when you kind of immerse yourself in this intensive period. And, when we fly veterans up there, they join a cohort of 12, right? So they're there with 11 other veterans who have basically decided to stop their life and dedicate everything to healing. And when you put yourself in that environment, you immerse yourself in that environment, you can really see amazing results in a short time. And as I said, some of our research has shown that these results have lasting effects as well. It's not going to go away as soon as you go home. That doesn't mean you're going to get, everything's going to be solved in 2 weeks, but it means you're going to be given the tools, the skill sets to thrive, to overcome those stuck points, and to be a better individual when you get back home.
Definitely.
Can you share some success stories that demonstrate the positive outcomes of home-based world-class clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of great testimonies and stories that have come out of Home Base over the years. One of my favorites is a gentleman named Matt, who is from Florida, where I'm at currently. And Matt was an amazing Army soldier. He was a combat engineer by trade, had won Soldier of the Year, had won Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. But after a number of deployments, it just took a toll on him. It took a toll on his body physically, and it took a toll on his mental health. But eventually he was forced to retire out of the Army. And that kind of led to a downward spiral for him. His transition into the civilian sector wasn't as smooth as he had hoped, right? I think he started relying on certain substances to get by, get through the day. That had negative effects on his family, on his marriage, his relationship with his children. And he had kind of hit rock bottom. And I had met Matt probably a year before he called me to ask for more help. But, we had played golf together a couple of times, gone to a couple of different events for veterans and met each other there. And about a year into knowing him, he gave me a call and said, hey, I'm at my bottom here, man, and I really need help. And is there something you can do? And so we actually flew him up to Boston for the intensive clinical program, and it turned his life around. I mean, when he got back home, we saw a number of examples of him getting better. One of them was the testimony from his parents about having their son back and how they hadn't seen that version of their son in more than a decade. He went on to finish his graduate degree at Clemson University, finishing near the top of his class after returning home. And one part that I kind of failed to mention earlier is a couple of months before he went up to Boston to home base, him and his wife actually decided to get divorced and separated. And so they did. And after he came back home and kind of found this new path and went back to school and started focusing on himself and taking care of himself, him and his wife decided to get back together. And so they got back together, got married again, restarted their family. And now he's actually running a nonprofit here in Florida that's focused on helping veterans through camaraderie, through adventure-based activities. They do a lot of water sports and stuff like that. So it really is a full circle of a guy who was a peak soldier, a peak physical condition, peak performance, really nailing it when it comes to being a soldier. And then he had that downfall and he stumbled hard. But he was able to get his feet back under him with a little bit of help from home base. He did a lot of the work. We were just there to kind of walk alongside him to show him the steps and to make sure he knew that he could do it. And, to this day, I think he's still one of our most shining examples of what you can be if you put in the work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because we all know that that's not the outcome for all of us that have been deployed or had those traumatic experiences in the military. And this is probably one of so many stories that we actually need to share to highlight and promote and to let people know that coming back from a deployment, we probably will hit rock bottom like you mentioned. And our families tend to miss that version of us, but it doesn't mean that we cannot become better than who we were before the military as well. So we're glad to hear stories like that all the time. That's one of the things that fills my cup back, when I hear those stories. I'm fortunate to work with veterans every day. And when I hear those stories, it actually propels me to continue to do what I do as well. So that's a great story.
I think you make a great point, David. It's important for us to share these stories because too often we hear the negative stories, right? The stories that don't end well, right? We know about roughly 20 veterans a day are taking their own lives, and those aren't stories that end well. We hear about that every day. And so I think it is important for us to share the victories and to show the examples that there are ways to come back from this.
What are some of the challenges that Home Base has faced, and how has the organization worked to overcome these obstacles?
It's a great question. Yeah, we faced a number of challenges over the year. I'll go back to the story with Matt quickly because Matt really helped us discover something that we were kind of blind to. And so a couple of months after Matt got back from Boston, we had a little group session where we got a bunch of veterans together who had been up to Boston and said, hey, how are things going since you've been home? What are things like? And they said, well, we have great fitness programs here in Florida, which is great. You just sent us up to Boston, though, and we got access to literally some of the best care in the world, some of the best care possible. And then we came back to Florida. And Florida, unfortunately, does not do well when it comes to behavioral health and mental health care historically. And they've definitely gotten better over the years, but there was really a lack of access to ongoing services. And so they said, we went up to Boston, we got the best care possible. And then we came home and we're trying to figure out how do we keep this care going? And that was a challenge that we didn't really have an answer for. And so for us, that pushed us to think about, well, how do we provide care for these veterans when they get back home? And so that's where we really focused and doubled down on this community empowerment model. And we found a couple of local behavioral health clinics here in Southwest Florida that were already doing great behavioral health care. They just didn't really have that opportunity to do it with veterans. And so for us, it was about developing this sort of innovative model where home base would go out and recruit the veterans. We'd find the veterans. We'd get them in the door. We would train the clinicians. We'd make sure that they had all the tools and access that they needed. And then when we connected a veteran to that clinic, they could get in a very timely manner and at absolutely no cost to them. So it was a way for us to say, okay, you know, we can't build home-based clinics everywhere. But what we can do is we can partner with existing clinics and figure out how do we deliver great care for them when they return back home. And so it was kind of that situation that was placed in front of us that allowed us to develop an innovative model and say, okay, well, we have to problem solve here, right? It's great for us to send veterans up to Boston and get care, but when they get back home, how do we continue to provide that care? We can't just abandon them at that point. And so we developed a really cool model here in Florida, and now we're working on rolling it out across the state through a couple of other places throughout the country. And it's my goal to eventually bring it to Puerto Rico in the next couple of years as well.
That'll be great, because one of the follow-up questions that I had was about how would you be able to impact veterans that living outside of the continental U.S. I think with us, you have per capita one of the largest veteran populations out there. So that'll be another resource that we would have for our veterans here in Puerto Rico, which will be amazing.
About 2 years ago, Home Base started doing some work with Native American tribes and Navajo Nation and some groups out in the Arizona and the Southwest area. And we learned a lot about some of the challenges that they face, right? Being in rural communities, you know, you can't take internet for granted, certain things, right? Cultural differences that didn't necessarily support veterans returning home. And so for us, it was about thinking about how do we help these Native American veterans as well, because like Puerto Rican veterans, they serve in high rates and then they come back home to a place that's pretty under-resourced and they don't have the same access to programs and care that a lot of other veterans do. And so we've thought about developing a 5-day version of what we do in Boston, right? So if I send a veteran up to Boston, we send them up for 2 weeks and we cram as much therapy in as we can in that 2 weeks. Well, we're actually looking at a 5-day model right now where we'll take our clinicians from Boston and fly them to these rural locations and be able to deliver that care on site. So we're hoping to pilot a program in partnership with some Native American tribes out in the Southwest later this year and early into 2024. And then, as I said, it's my goal, you know, having spent some time in Puerto Rico, having worked with you guys a little bit, I've noticed that it's not the exact same problems that we're facing out in Navajo Nation, but there's a lot of similarities, right? The high service rate, the coming home to a rural community, the access to basic resources sometimes can't be taken for granted. And so for me, I'd love to see us figure out, okay, can we also take that to Puerto Rico? Not just build partnerships there and deliver some type of care, but figure out, you know, I want to figure out how we get care to the veterans. It's great to bring the veterans to the care. I think sometimes in communities where veterans feel forgotten about, some of the best things we can do is figure out, well, how do we come to them and make sure that they don't have to leave home and that they can get the care that they deserve right in their backyard.
So sometimes the things that we have to challenge as well is the language barrier. So that's another example of the challenges that we may have as a U.S. territory. And then the other thing is the process. The process in the states are so different from our process. And sometimes we are classified as colonists, but sometimes we are not. We are classified as autonomous, which is international. So then we create this situation that sometimes we don't know the correct process because we are like an exception. So that's why it's really important to share information and work with collaboration. So that way we can receive better care and improve the services, because we know those services are outside. For us, it's kind of difficult to get information or to get the right process and the things that apply to us.
It sounds like a real challenge, right? I think about how difficult it is for the average veteran here in the States who has PTSD to navigate their own care, right? Their own behavioral health care. That's a real challenge if we're expecting veterans who are coming home with traumatic brain injuries and PTSD to figure out how to navigate the complexities of healthcare to take care of themselves. When you present those challenges that you just spoke about on top of that, I can only imagine how difficult it is and how frustrating it can be for veterans in Puerto Rico to try and seek care, to navigate such complexities where they may already be suffering from some of the invisible wounds.
How does home base approach outreach and education to ensure that veterans and their families are aware of the services and support available to them, regardless of their era of service, discharge, status, or location?
So for us, outreach is proactive, right? I don't like reactive outreach. I think we need to be proactive. We need to get out in the community and we need to share our message. And part of our message is ensuring that people know what makes us different at home base. And part of that is, one, we're a private nonprofit organization. We're not part of the VA. We're not part of the DOD. We're not a government-based organization. We are a private organization. Secondly, is to your point, is we don't discriminate against discharge status, era of service, or any other qualifying factor, right? For us, it's about if you've served one day for this country, you rate the services that home base can provide, and not just the veteran, but the family member as well. And our tagline here, I don't know if you can read my shirt here, it's home base, veteran, and family care, right? And so for us, it's about communicating that outreach. We want to make sure that not just veterans know that they deserve and these services are available to them, but we want to make sure the family knows that these services are available for them as well. For us, we've more recently tried to really tackle the location and geography outreach aspect of things, right? I briefly spoke about some of our work in Navajo Nation out in the Southwest, but additionally, ever since we went to Puerto Rico back in May, we've really looked at some of our flyers, some of our websites. Is there ways that we could communicate our services in Spanish so that veterans know what's available to them, right? Oftentimes for us, it's not the veteran who initially connects the care, it's the family member. I'll get a call from a parent, from a spouse, from a sibling, and they say, hey, my veteran really needs help, and I'm not sure they're going to call you. How can we work together to figure this out? And so, we as an organization will proactively go out and work with that family member to do outreach to that veteran. And it's important that for us that, one, that we do everything we can to ensure that underrepresented veterans are also feel that outreach. And so for us, we're currently working on translating flyers, websites, and other information that we have into Spanish so that Hispanic veterans as well as their family members can be informed on what services are available to them. And then additionally, we're working on being able to deliver some of our services in Spanish as well. So having Spanish-speaking providers, having translators. It's a complex topic because in order to translate some of this medical information, right, there's a standard that has to be done. And so it's a bit of a complex process, but for us, it's certainly worth undertaking and trying to figure out how we can do it. So for us, again, outreach is about being proactive. It's about educating the community. It's about meeting the needs of under-resourced veterans. And a part of that strategy is making sure that we don't just go into a community and assume we know what veterans need, right? And so for us, when we made our first trip out to Puerto Rico, one of the things I wanted to be careful that we didn't do was go and say, hey, here's who we are and here's how we can solve your problems, right? Because we don't really know what those problems are. And so we wanted to go into the community and say, yeah, here's kind of who we are and what we do, but what are the challenges that you guys are facing? What's unique to veterans on the island? And how can we maybe help fill some of those gaps with services that we provide now or new services that we can develop in the future? So outreach is also about being open-minded, about not assuming that you have all the answers to the problems out there.
Yeah. Speaking of the future, could you discuss any plans that you guys have, including potential expansions, partnerships, initiatives aimed at further enhancing support for veterans and their family members?
Yeah. So, we're working very closely to expand our services, as I mentioned, around traumatic brain injury. We want to make sure that we're prepared to battle those invisible wounds as we come across them quite frequently from veterans who are in our behavioral health clinics. We are working, as I mentioned, very closely with Native American veterans and Native American communities to make sure we're meeting needs of that population. We're also working on just taking a model that we've built here in Florida and expanding it to multiple places across the country to ensure that we can help as many veterans as possible. And then, of course, we are committed at this point to figuring out how we better serve veterans of Puerto Rico to meet their unique needs, to continue outreach in Puerto Rico to make sure that they know that we have not forgot about them. So Puerto Rico really excites me, the opportunity to help there, because when you think about the commitment that those veterans and many of their family members have made and that we haven't really been there for them, that I think that there's so much opportunity. And, some of the guys and gals that I met over there, we're just so grateful that home base was taking the time to think about them a little bit. And that really, it filled my cup, as you said, David. It really reinvigorated me that, okay, we're doing the right thing here. These men and women who served in Puerto Rico, they want our help. They need our help. And for us, we're dedicated to continuing our efforts there, one with outreach, and then hopefully in the near future, potentially some clinical partnerships or programming as well.
Yeah, that'll be great because they're already looking forward. Somebody told them that you guys are coming back in January. They're already waiting and asking me, and I'm like, hey, I don't know all the details. They just said that they're coming back in January. So just them knowing that you guys will be back is enough for them to know that you guys are really committed to helping out the veteran and their family members. I actually spoke to a group of significant others today. They also shared how impactful it was to hear from you guys and to actually have you guys there with them. They were really grateful for everything that you guys did the last couple of times that you've been down here. So we really appreciate it.
Well, hopefully that's just a start. I know we are planning on coming back in January, and I know that I continue to bring this up to my leadership. My leadership is very supportive of our efforts there in Puerto Rico. And I think that hopefully that's just the beginning of a long-standing relationship and improving. I have a mentor named General Fred Franks, and he's from the Vietnam era. And he talks oftentimes about a fractured trust. When they came back from Vietnam, there was an implied trust that when they put their life on their line for their country, when they came home, that their country would be there for them. In Vietnam, that didn't happen. And so he often talks about fractured trust and how we can never allow that trust to be fractured again. We have to repair that trust, and we can't take that trust for granted. And so for me, I feel like the trust with Puerto Rican veterans has slightly been fractured. I feel like we haven't taken care of them the way they deserve with the services that they've earned with their selfless sacrifice. And so for me, I'm very excited about trying to repair that fractured trust and make sure that the veterans and family members of Puerto Rico know how grateful we are for their service and all the sacrifices that they made.
That's awesome. I think we should call it right there. Armando, thanks again for taking the time to be here with us for this episode. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will enjoy the information that's being put out, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys again. Okay.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you both for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to speak with you both.
Recuerda que esta temporada estaremos auspiciados por nuestros amigos de Buff Bear. Mejora tus entrenamientos, muestra tu estilo y canaliza tu bestia interior con Buff Bear. Visite buffbearpr.com y disfrute del envío gratis en pedidos de $100 o más. Eleva tu entrenamiento con Buff Bear, la marca de ropa que está impactando el mundo de fitness. En nuestro próximo episodio estaremos conversando con nuestro amigo Javier Gil de Aventura Vertical PR, así que estén pendientes. Si no lo han hecho aún, visiten la página de ellos en Instagram para que vean todas las diferentes actividades que tienen para hacer en los lugares más bonitos de nuestra isla. Para apoyar nuestro proyecto, síguenos en Facebook, Instagram y YouTube. Y por último, solo falta decir:
Gracias por tu servicio.
Great point.
Se me ve la pantalla.
Dale un poquito más de ánimo. Ya.